Hi everyone, my name is Lauren Harvey and I'm a lecturer in law in the Department of Law and Criminology at Aberystwyth University. And this is an introduction to my channel talent talk on analysing crime and criminal conduct. So I just want to set out how you are going to be able to participate in the live session. First and foremost, the session is designed to be interactive. All that I ask is that you give it a go. You're going to be able to answer the questions I pose by typing in the chat, or you're more than welcome to turn on your mic and to talk to me. If you're in a group or a class setting, you may want to discuss things amongst yourselves and have your teacher post some of your responses. All I want to do is to get you thinking about things. I don't mind if you know the right answer or not. In fact, I don't expect you to know the right answer. You don't need any prior knowledge to participate in this session, so just have a go, have a guess, tell me what you think. You're also more than welcome to ask me any questions as we go along. We are going to be covering some fairly sensitive and mature issues. All I ask is that you deal with these maturely. That means expressing your views sensitively and remaining open-minded to the opinions of others. You're most welcome to be critical. It's a key skill in university, but what we mean by critical thinking is to critique and debate the law, the issues raised and any policies behind them, not to criticise someone else's opinion. And a key part of critical thinking is to provide a balanced view. So try to consider everything we're talking about from both sides. I also have to give you a trigger warning. We are going to be covering some fairly heavy things like murder, abortion, capital punishment, euthanasia, and you may feel personally impacted by these. So if you do at any time, please feel free to take a breather and to resume the session when you feel able to. So here's what we're going to be covering in this session. In this recording, I'm going to be providing you with some introductory themes, concepts and terminology in relation to crime, the criminal justice system and the criminal law. And then in the session itself, we're going to be looking a bit deeper into some of the issues, and we're going to have a go at analysing the boundaries of crime and exploring some of the great debates in criminal law. And again, so you feel prepared, I'm going to introduce you to some of those issues today. So the area we're going to be focusing on in the session is crime, criminal conduct and the criminal law, which is governed by the criminal justice system. So those are the agencies involved in the detection and prevention of crime. So bodies like the police, the Crown Prosecution Service, and the courts. So hopefully you know already that if you are ever a victim of crime, you report it to the police. The police then investigate the crime, they gather their evidence, and they hopefully find the person that they suspect of being the perpetrator. That is the person they suspect of carrying out the crime. And then they arrest them. So not everyone who is arrested will necessarily be charged with the crime. For less serious offences, the charging decision is made by the police. But for more serious crimes, the Crown Prosecution Service, and that is the body that prosecutes criminal cases on behalf of the Crown, they will decide whether or not to charge. If the Crown Prosecution Service decide to charge, then criminal proceedings in court will commence against the accused person, and they will be prosecuted in a criminal court, either the magistrates or the Crown Court, depending on the severity of the crime. If they are then found guilty or have pleaded guilty to a crime, then they will be convicted of the crime and sentenced. If they're found not guilty, then they're free to go. Because remember, everyone is innocent until proven guilty. And that is a fundamental principle of our criminal justice system, which is referred to as the presumption of innocence. And this presumption is based on the premise that it's better to let 10 guilty people go free in society than to convict one innocent person. And you should be aware that the principle of open justice operates in our justice system. And this is the principle that court proceedings are conducted in public, which means that you, as members of the public, are all able to go along and to observe a criminal court hearing as a member of the public. So the criminal law is a very serious business, and it has really wide-reaching consequences for both the accused and the victim. And we're going to be exploring in this session why this is the case. So what I'd like you to do beforehand is to consider these questions. What do you think can happen to a person who has been convicted of a crime? What are the potential consequences, both immediately and in the longer term? What about the victim of a crime? What do you think are the psychological effects of them of going through the criminal justice process and the court process? What if the offender isn't convicted? What if they're found not guilty? What impact do you think this could then have on the victim? So we're going to be analysing the boundaries of the crime and looking at some great debates in criminal law within the session. As you know, a person has to commit a crime in order to be arrested, charged and convicted in a criminal court. So therefore, the first job of the criminal law is to define crime. They have to set the boundaries of which acts, any acts that we can do in our day-to-day lives, which acts constitute a crime, and if so, why? But also we're going to discover it's not as easy as it sounds, and the question of which acts should constitute a crime does fuel a lot of debate in the criminal law. So what is the accepted definition of crime? It's actually quite vague. It says crime is a wrong against the state, which is punished by the state. So it doesn't actually really give us much to go on here other than crime is a wrong. But how wrong? And by whose standards? Because different people might think that different things are wrong. So the problem with trying to define crime is that it isn't static. It changes all the time. What might have been a crime 30 years ago, say, may no longer be a crime now. Similarly, what might currently be a crime in this country might be legal in the Netherlands or illegal in Iran. So that's why we refer to crime as a social construct. Basically, what this means is that society decides what a crime is, dependent on the attitudes of that particular society at that particular time. It's about what is acceptable to society or not. So to demonstrate this, in this session, I'm going to ask you to provide some examples of acts that have been perceived as criminal historically, but aren't anymore, or vice versa. Or I'm going to ask you to think of examples of acts that are considered criminal in one country, but not in another. And there are some examples there on the screen of some ideas that you might take away to think about. Having said that crime isn't static, it is, however, accepted that there are some general characteristics that usually, not necessarily always, but usually apply to crimes. First of all, a crime is usually an act which causes harm to the public. Secondly, a crime is usually an act which is morally wrong. Okay, so again, these are quite vague and subjective, aren't they? How much harm are we talking about? What is harm? It's very much based on people's opinions and different people's morals. Different people have different ideas of what is morally acceptable and not. Generally, though, this can be applied to a lot of acts. So, for example, take theft, for instance. Theft causes harm, okay? Undoubtedly, it causes loss to someone of personal property, for instance. And we know it's considered morally wrong generally because society functions on the basis of ownership and that you don't take what isn't yours. Okay, again, this thing might apply to murder. Murder is the worst crime that can happen. And it produces the worst loss to someone. And we know that thou shalt not kill. Morally, we know not to take lives of others. But sometimes the boundaries of crime are not as obvious. There are some potentially harmful or morally wrong acts that are not crimes. Take, for instance, something like adultery. And also there are acts that are crimes in this country that you could argue are not necessarily morally wrong or harmful. So for instance, smoking cannabis, some people consider it less harmful or as harmful at least as drinking, whereas drinking is illegal, but smoking cannabis is illegal. So for task 2, I'm going to ask you to come up with some ideas of conduct that perhaps isn't as obvious as to whether it should be a criminal offence or not. So see what you can come up with. The criminal law also has a really difficult job of setting the age at which a person can be held criminally responsible for their actions. That is the age at which they can be arrested, charged, convicted, and even sent to custody. So the law acknowledges that small children are not criminally responsible for their actions. That is until a certain age. So we're going to be exploring this in the session. What age is this? And what do we think about this? So see in advance if you can try and find out what the minimum age of criminal responsibility is in the UK and how this compares with other countries. We're also going to continue with looking at the boundaries of the criminal law by exploring duty to assist and Good Samaritan laws. So let me ask you a question. If you were taking a walk in your local park and you walked past a duck pond and you saw a small child had fallen in, do you think you have any obligation under the criminal law to try and rescue that child and to stop them from drowning? Okay, so what I'm asking you is whether you have a obligation under the law. Obviously, morally you have an obligation to do something, but would you be prosecuted for a crime if you didn't help that child? So the question is, do you think there is a general duty to assist or to rescue people in danger in England and Wales? And we're going to look at this further in this session, but the answer might be a little bit more disturbing than you would think. So the criminal law, as we've already kind of touched on, involves a lot of moral and ethical debates. But sometimes the law is put in an impossible situation where perhaps one person's interest directly conflicts with another person's. And then there's just no obvious right or wrong answer, but the courts still have to make that ultimate decision. So we're going to finish off the session with a few moral debates, and we're going to see what you think about them. So first of all, we're going to look at the case of Dudley and Stevens. This is a real legal case about cannibalism. Then we're going to look at the case of Re-A children. Again, another real case from back in the 2000s that you might have heard of regarding whether or not to separate conjoined twins. And the last moral dilemma that we're going to look at is a fictional one, which again, you might already have heard of, and it's referred to as the trolley problem. So all of these kind of cases and problems illustrate a couple of key debates in criminal law. Firstly, is killing worse than letting die? What do you think? Is killing someone worse than letting them die? A lot of criminal law is based on the premise and the theory that killing is a lot more blameworthy than just simply letting somebody die. The second key debate is this idea of the theory of the greater good. This is referred to as utilitarianism, and it's an ethical theory that believes that the best action is always going to be the one that promotes the greater good for the greatest number of people. Again, what do you think about that? What it's saying is it doesn't matter what action you take to get there, as long as it's the greatest good for the greatest number of people. So sometimes, as we're going to find out, these theories are going to conflict with each other, and it's for the courts to try to figure out what to do. Thanks for listening. I hope this introduction has given you an idea of what to expect in the session and some ideas to think on in advance. So I look forward to seeing you in the session and to hearing your thoughts on some of these issues.